Well, welcome to this episode of the King's Hall podcast. And today we are joined by the same three people that are always on this show. Let's start with our keynote host, Ben Garrett.
Yes, my name is Ben Brian Sauvé Garrett. That's actually my UFC fighter name.
Brian, I had to do that because Brian did that to us. Do you remember when you and I were gone and they did the episode?
Oh yeah.
He was like, just the regular hosts, me and Ben Garrett.
The haunted cosmos invasion of the King's Hall.
We've gotten
Who was the other host? It was what'd you say?
Ben Brian Sauvé Garrett.
Oh, yeah, I forgot. So just so everybody knows, we didn't kick Brian off the show.
But the main point is that Brian is expendable. He can be replaced.
Well, temporarily. So
I've always said that. Nobody's listened.
Nobody listened.
I always said it. I said Brian's expendable.
So Brian, first of all, bailed on the Right Response Conference.
Yeah.
He made up some excuse that his wife was having a baby.
And then she did have the baby.
Like that week.
Yes.
So actually he had time to make it to the conference, but as Joel said at the conference, he chose not to come. That was savage. So yeah, Brian is on paternity leave, but Dan Burkholder's not yet on paternity leave.
No, not
and
yet.
So Dan, welcome to the show. First of all, flannel, camo hat.
Here I am.
You are representing, every show has to represent the, white collar intellectual.
Here I am. You called and I answered.
Here I am. So we're going to be doing a bit of debrief on the conference. I actually learned quite a lot about a lot of things at the conference.
Like what?
The Longhouse.
Oh,
Yeah.
I thought you taught on that.
Yeah, but I learned as I taught.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
ChatGPT wrote the manuscript.
It was fascinating. No, it didn't.
I'm kidding.
Ben, so I want to ask you, first of all, you gave a pitch for a few things
I did.
at the conference. And one of the things was Brian's new album.
Yes. Awake the Dawn.
The Dawn has been awakened.
Indeed it has. And in fact, you can pre-order vinyls right now.
You see, Ben, it's like pre-programming. It's beautiful. We did also, by the way, we met a lot of Anons. And it was funny because after the whole kerfuffle last year with, the vitriol against the Anons, every single one I met, I was like, do you live in your mom's basement? And they were like, no. I was like, are you an incel? And they were like, no, I have like 6 kids. I'm like, what do you do for work? And almost every single one of them was like a very successful business owner. So I thought that was exciting.
Oh, yeah.
No names revealed, but the Anons were definitely there.
Yeah, they were vindicated.
One of the things that was interesting at the conference, we had a really good panel. I think there was one panel, one of the first days. Well, I guess it was technically the second day there was a panel.
Yeah, Friday morning.
But, for my money, our panel was the best panel.
Oh, it's not even close.
So we had Andrew Isker, we had Cjay Engel, we had Dan Burkholder, myself, Ben, and then a last minute addition, Thomas Achord. And that was really cool. So we did this panel. First of all, I was surprised, Dan, by Cjay Engel was white pilling.
CJ, rolled my socks down. That guy was.
He rolled my socks.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Is that like a Midwest?
I hope I used it in the right way.
What does that even mean?
It means that something was so good, it rolled your socks down.
Wow.
I don't know. There's probably some sexual innuendo that I don't understand. So if there is, please forgive me. It was out of ignorance. Anyway, no, but CJ, man, he brought the fire.
He did.
Just his reputation is such that it seems like he's manages risk really well. And he's definitely more intelligent, than the average guy.
Yes.
But on that panel at Right Response Ministries Christ is King Conference in Texas, he gave the white pill, lots of hope. And I think a lot of it is because of the momentum that they're getting with their Ridge Runner project in Tennessee and the success they're seeing there. And also the pushback that they're getting from Tennessee media is probably really solidifying their tribe in Tennessee.
Yeah, so fresh round of pushback from Nashville reporter. Can't even remember his name. Doesn't even matter.
Phil Williams?
Honestly, who is that?
Kamala Harris.
But I think a lot of it is renewed because Isker was on Tucker Carlson. And I think it's interesting, Dan, because in our movement, these conferences, you go to them and it's kind of, it's a window kind of into what's happening at a broader scale because you get to talk to all these people. It seems like trends come into play. You start to notice trends being at the conference, talking to different people, maybe hearing the same thing over and over again. So I felt like that was really helpful. But one of the things like Cjay had mentioned was in the paleocon, neocon fights of the 80s and 90s, it was really the fact that people on the right were just like eating their own. They were devouring one another. And so Cjay had called for, we need to band together, those of us who are aligned, and we need to allow for differences, be friends, and push the ball forward. But we've also noticed something, I think that Joel said, which is that now that there's victory, a lot of people are actually stepping back from the fight. This is sort of like the Bane. What is the full Bane quote? Like, victory has defeated you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You know?
He's like, you've grown fat in peacetime. That's not what he says, but more or less, that's the idea.
Victory has made you weak.
Victory has defeated you. Yeah. I'd have to look up the full quote. But so, Ben, I want to ask you about that. It seems like in the last couple of years, maybe the game has changed like 4 or 5 times in terms of the right, political, cultural. So just kind of curious what you make of it.
Yeah, it's been a season of shakeup, really for this whole half of a generation, I think. There's been a lot of shakeup happening. As the modern world has been revealed for its bankruptcy, you get, it seems to be 2 different responses, and there's spectrums on each response. There's the ones that, for some reason, want to kind of maintain that bankrupt modernity, and that's the left. And they do it by either just look, and that's the left of both sides of the political spectrum, by the way, the neocons and the liberals. And some of the liberals want to go very extreme, and they are just like, well, let's just dive in and let's make it as bad as we can, thinking that somehow it'll get better. But then there's also the response of saying, why don't we try to return back to what we had before, but in a way that seeks to guard against what got us here. And so I think Cjay brought this up, looking for the transcendent again, even in our political philosophy, not settling for a purely secular mindset in secular matters.
It can't be like a godless conservatism.
Right. So and this is kind of the whole Christian nationalism conversation that Stephen Wolfe reignited with his book, is it's a secular sphere. It's not a holy sphere. Civics are a natural thing, but that doesn't make them inherently holy. But if you remove the transcendent from that secular sphere, and I mean secular classically, then you'll get something that's, I mean, it really is a Leviathan. It's this beast that is destroying civilization instead of doing what it ought to do, which is build it up. And I think you even saw some of the spectrum on the return side of things at the conference, where there's different levels of strong, violent reactions against what's happening. For example, in America, it's easier for us to be softer towards these things because we aren't being as violently invaded as like the UK is by the Muslims. I mean, the UK is suffering. If half of what Calvin Robinson said was true, or Aaron Edwards, who we talked to, if half of what they said was true, then they are undergoing a legitimate jihad, and they're suffering the invasion of a Muslim horde that's killing their people, raping their women, all these, and fully replacing them. In America, we're seeing that, but it's not as in our face yet, depending on where you live. And so I think it can be easier for us to have this sense of security, like we still have time. But one thing that I walked away from the conference with was like, no, we need to be more desperate. We need to be more desperate in our fight. We need to be willing to pull less punches. We need to be willing to say the thing even more firmly that the left and that the neocons don't want to hear.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Dan, one of the things that struck me was sort of, we're in this moment where Trump gets elected. You see some initial victories on the right. I don't think that I think it's like in Alfred's time where there's a victory in the initial melee, right? You have a first fight. there's a little bit of victory on the right. One of the mistakes that could be made is now people, they don't pursue. I wonder if you saw any of that, just kind of the need, especially as Ben mentioned from the guys in the UK, like the fight isn't won. And so now isn't the time to pull back as though we've secured victory. Maybe in a battle, but the war is still going on.
Yeah, I think Ben really hit it on the nose when he talked about desperation. You know, I think that there's something that really victory is a time of testing to sort out, I guess, lower quality men from the higher quality men is really what happens when you get victory. We've long said like that success is much harder to manage than failure or defeat. Because, for example, in business, if your business isn't making money, it's really easy to manage. It's pretty much like, when do we stop? You know, where success is actually quite difficult to manage. And I think that a lower tier man encounters these temptations actually in many spheres outside of just political movements or, you know, outside of cultural movements and things like that. If you were to take something really simple, say like a household budget, or work, you work really hard, you finally get a raise, you get that promotion, you get a bonus. And this is really what separates a lower tier man from a higher tier man, a man of courage that understands desperation and sacrifice and has a long-term vision. The man who is more short-term in his thinking is going to take that raise or that bonus and often like buys something that they've always wanted and goes into debt. And they have the same cycle that actually repeats. They're still continually poor because they didn't know how to manage success. And so they end up shrinking back. Whereas instead of thinking strategically like, oh, I've got, you know, I'll just keep living the way I did and I'll just use this money to invest, to buy business, to, you know, whatever it is, to make wise financial moves. That's just a really small snapshot example. Businesses do this all the time. They'll just gut the business and try to milk the cow for all it's worth and never really reinvest in the business. And then it never really grows and eventually it dies. Well, I think what we're seeing is, like you said, Eric, we had massive momentum coming into the conservative movement, you know, where all of a sudden, like some of the things that is coming from the White House, that is being said from the White House, would have gotten you removed from X, you know, just a few years ago.
Oh, yeah.
They would have canceled you. And so a lot of guys who have been on the front lines and fighting, there's probably some exhaustion and battle fatigue. But at the same time, people don't know how to manage success because think about our lifetimes, right? So Eric and I were born in the 80s. Were you born in, mid-90s?
95.
95. There you go. All we've experienced most of our life is really defeat, or at least fighting a losing battle. Because even you know, the GOP conservatives, they were fighting to lose. That's what they were doing. They never really took any ground. They were just trying to figure out how to manage failure and defeat. And so now that things have changed, and we are seeing some battles won, I don't think that men understand how to manage success. And so what's happening is there's this strange change of perception, I think, from some guys that we're seeing, especially in our movement, in the Christian right, the new Christian right, and Christian nationalism, is that this feeling of success, they don't know what to do, and they're starting to see radicals emerge. And so it seems like the position that they're taking is shrinking back into more Big Eva kind of normie sort of positions in order to not be associated with those radicals on the right, you know? So I think that that's really one of the principles is essentially there is a, you know, snatching defeat from the jaws of victory sort of mentality.
Yeah, this is something I tweeted the other day on that same note. I said, there are many who do not have the stomach or the will for what must be done to win. This is what many conservatives have always done, and you're seeing this more on the right wing at this moment. They will posture right wing, but they will act like a centrist. So you'll see guys who will keep saying things that are like remotely conservative, but then you'll also see the deeds, and a lot of it will be very centrist.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're seeing like a magnetic pull towards the center. So yes. You have some people from the right that are moving back to the center, back left. And you also have this interesting dynamic where leftists are seeing the right as victorious now as the Overton window has shifted.
Yep.
And so you have guys like Governor Newsom, that's moving right, apparently, right. And because they're
just putting on a different skin suit.
Exactly. So it seems like people are kind of shifting back to this magnetic center, which is now just slightly right of where we were a few years ago.
But I love this. So I tweeted that, and then Thomas Achord retweeted it with a speech from Henry V, Crispin's Day speech. And he said, "He which hath no stomach to this fight, let him depart. His passport shall be made, and crowns for convoy put into his purse. We would not die in that man's company that fears his fellowship to die with us." And so I think there's also a cool thing happening on the right where, and that panel was kind of a small snapshot of it, where in many ways you have all the guys on that panel, including Joel, who people have tried to dox, cancel. We're sort of, I said this at the conference, it's sort of like the cave of Adulum, where everyone who is cast out from Saul's regime is now forming a certain kind of alliance. And Thomas is maybe a good picture of this, has sins, has repented of them. But there were people in our camp who were hellbent on saying, no, you should be canceled forever. And it was interesting. That was kind of the first time that I got to sit down and spend a lot of time with Thomas. And Ben, I want to get your thoughts, but incredibly humble, incredibly brilliant, knows the Western canon almost by heart, and had a ton of really valuable insights about this time.
Yeah. Dan, I think you make an interesting point. It almost seems like people conflate Newton's laws and assume that they apply across the board, even in unmechanical ways. So like Newton's first law, an object in motion tends to stay in motion. That doesn't seem to be true though for movements of people and ideas, where we get this idea that since we've had a kind of victory, we can now go back to the comfort. We can go back to the status quo because we've created some haven or something for our ideas. But that's not true. If the movement, if the idea doesn't keep pushing with the momentum that it has, it'll actually just lose the momentum. It doesn't stay in motion naturally. You have to keep pushing. And I think that it's going to be tempting for us to be comfortable again because we've lost our stomach for discomfort in many ways. But we need to reclaim that. Like discomfort is the thing that actually brings about either loss or victory. But one thing that'll happen if you certainly reject discomfort is loss. You will lose if you seek comfort. Now, if you put yourself in the vice and you let it squeeze you and you actually try to push against it, there's a chance of winning. To your point about Thomas, I thought that, the dude's brilliant. Like, we're talking about ideas of, fathers setting their sons up for success and what happens when the son is rejected, but he nonetheless takes the gifts of will that he inherited from his fathers and makes a return on that anyway. And he's bringing up like Theseus and Orpheus and all these people, and he's just pulling them out of his head at a split second. And I think that's very important. I think a guy like Thomas, guys like Stephen Wolfe, I would hope, more and more, especially as time goes on, guys like us are able to reclaim that ethos that built the West and said the ethos that built the West did not settle for Europe. It didn't settle for the East. It lost the East because it started settling. No, it pushed further west. It went to Hesperia. It had manifest destiny. And I think we need to reclaim that idea that our manifest destiny, God has set us up in such a way providentially that not only is the church founded in America, but also can ascend in America. And so we have this great opportunity where we can basically restart manifest destiny over again and say, let's have the mindset of the explorers, the colonizers that were pushing this kind of Pax Western across the world and creating beauty out of chaos. But in order to do that, we can't settle for minor victories here and there. We have to keep pushing and pushing and pushing until the victory is completely won. And even then, you have to do the work of continuing the victory with the next generation, setting people up well, not abandoning your sons when they are more zealous than you about certain things, but fostering the zeal and giving it the tools that it needs to succeed.
Yeah, this was something we were talking about in the green room with Thomas. Is like, how do we, as we're the younger men at the moment, and so a lot of us like 30s and 40s, how do we ensure that we set our sons up well? Because this is really something that has happened, is that there's been a rift in the generations, and it's particularly with older men who are like, I don't want to hand the baton to anyone in the younger generation. So I guess my question, Dan, as you think about that, how do we set our sons up well? How do we, it's something I said on the panel. I think we have to be content in realizing we're kind of the tip of the spear generation, meaning you're going to do a lot of the fighting. You're going to be maybe more like David, where it's like, and I can hear Matt Chandler, you're not David. But in David's generation, it was all warfare. It was long seasons of being on the run, being an outcast. And really the glory of the kingdom comes to Solomon, not to David. But he still sets his son up well to succeed in the glory that he built and that he fought for. And so I think for a lot of us, we just have to be content with, like, you're going to be hated. We have to keep pressing forward on things like the Longhouse and being against feminism and confronting all the ways. And even I said in my talk, even in the conservative movement, we still have feminism. It's just a little slower than leftist feminism, but we still have to address these things. So yeah, just getting back to the question, how do you set your sons up well? How do we not make the same mistake when we get to 60, 70 and doing what has kind of been done to us?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very big question. I think just some simple things to recognize with created order is that the scriptures praise young men for their strength and for zeal. And old men aren't praised in the same way. It's their gray hairs and their wisdom.
Yeah.
And so the issue that we have is a collision of ways that older men and younger men can sin, but talk about older men for a second. Older men can definitely sin in a way where they possess wisdom and experience. And so they're able to see, like, you can see this in younger boys and teenagers, they don't have fully developed brains yet. They're not that smart, but man, do they have energy and they have strength and they have zeal. For example, you get them interested in a hobby or an idea and they make their entire personalities about it and they attack it without rest. Like that's just how younger men are wired, is that they're strong and they have zeal. And so the temptations from the wiser man is to continually just punch down and to try to squash that zeal and say, like, just sit down. You don't understand. You haven't lived as long as I have. When you're my age, you'll get it, and so just completely squash that. But you also have a collision with the feminization of America and Western civilization, especially in the 20th century with feminism and how it's infiltrated even men in a feminist way of thinking, to where there's also now, I think, with grandparents, maybe some of you that are our age and have boomer grandparents of your children, they one of their favorite phrases is just be careful. You take them to the kids to the playground. It's like, oh, be careful, be careful, be careful. Like, it's crazy. So you have not only like, hey, just settle down, but you also have to be careful. Don't take risk. Actually, the best way to succeed at life is to invest in your retirement account, to just work harder and you'll get a better job. You'll be fine. Just keep your head down. Make sure that nobody notices. Just be careful. So you have those two instincts now that are colliding into like this super storm of essentially squashing any youthful zeal or strength, any desire to wage war and to do battle, on the cultural front or to, further the gospel and disciple the nations and things like that. They're just like, well, be careful and, just settle down, sit down and settle down. And so one of the things that we have to recognize as we're passing the baton to the next generation and preparing ourselves is that you cannot despise youthful zeal, but you should direct it. Like that is where you actually get a connection that is glorious in this created order, in this natural order of older men and younger men that God has instructed us in his word, is that the older, wiser man has had a lot of experience. Hopefully he's fought these battles. I don't think a lot of the boomers really fought those sorts of battles, but they have had some battles that they've fought. They should have experience and they should have wisdom. You might be tempted to do this. Don't do that. That's a terrible idea. But go this way, be on guard of this ditch and this ditch, and really directing the zeal, but not squashing it. Like men should be zealous.
Well, I thought that was one of the encouragements from the conference, just in talking to a lot of the attendees, was there were guys there who came up to me and were like, hey, really appreciate the work that you and Ogden are doing. We need so much more of it. And they were like 65-year-old gray-haired. Many of them were pastors. And we're like, you guys are fighting the fight we need to fight. Like, you're an encouragement. Keep it up.
Yeah, and I mean, I know I just broad brushed everything. Like the boomers are the worst and the young men are the best. And that's absolutely not true. Like there's a lot of great boomers and there's a lot of not great young men.
Yeah.
But that's really how things should if we want to pass on the baton, we have to have a vision, by the way, that transcends our own life. And that's compelling enough, a positive vision for the future, that we can pass on to the next generation and say, here's the target. I couldn't reach it. I don't know if you'll be able to reach it either, but you should pass this on to your generations because this should transcend your life as well. This is a multi-generational task. To 1,000 generations is the work of building, and you just need to stand on my shoulders and just keep going. And that's really what we need to do if we're going to pass on the baton and continue to work, not just lose it. Just like wealth is often lost. You get rags to riches stories, where some guy, he didn't have anything and he becomes really wealthy and successful and his kids lose it. It's lost because he actually didn't train his children. And he was desperate. He understood desperation of the moment, of poverty, of working hard, and how to manage success. And for some reason did not communicate that to the second generation because they didn't experience the same desperation. They didn't see the hardships. They didn't understand how to manage their wealth and the business. And so you look at the same thing with a cultural inheritance. I think there is a disassociation with the boomer generation because so much of the prosperity in Western civilization was culminated. It was like a pinnacle at the time of the boomer generation. And so now you have a desperation in the millennials and the Zoomers where they did not experience the same blessings as their boomer parents. And so we are increasing in desperation. I think that's why you see a lot more zeal in Gen Z, is because they're looking at the future and they have very little hope. I know we've talked about it before, but there is a survey that was done and it was asking Zoomers the similar questions that asked other generations. But one of the questions was, is there anything that you can do to improve your future? And overwhelmingly, the Zoomers said, no, there's absolutely nothing I can do to improve my future. And so there is desperation amongst the Zoomers, and even younger millennials see that a lot. And so I think we're at a time now where the building can really begin. I know that was really rambly, but it all culminates in this idea, like just don't squash zeal and don't impose your experience and your time of blessing on someone who has no chance and opportunity to experience that.
I'm trying to think too, like it seems like one of the temptations for older men is to pearl clutch and see the zeal of young, especially if it's a competent zeal. Like if it's a young man who's not just stoked, but he's also directed and he is really good at this thing that he's set himself in. The older men, if they don't have that, if they're thinking selfishly, and they don't know the times enough to maintain that compelling vision for the future and see its adaptations for the next generation as a good thing, as a growth, then they'll see the young men as a threat and they'll start to be really hypocritical. And so they'll start to emphasize, like, be careful. I know that you talked about this a lot. Like, hey, just make sure you're being very careful. Make sure you're not doing the wrong thing. And that seems to me like the height of hypocrisy, because anyone that pushed the needle any length in their lifetime, in their generation, did so by taking risk. And the risk can vary. It can be great risk or it can be small risk, but it's risk nonetheless. And so to then turn around after you've inherited something great and maybe have made some kind of return on it, and to just emphasize, and I'm not talking about thoughtfulness. Thoughtfulness is a virtue, but like safetyism and safety first. And well, just make sure you're not taking too much risk. No, that is hypocritical. And I think sometimes, I don't want to paint with too broad a brush, but I think sometimes that can be even more tempting to do when the older men are seeing the younger men as a threat and not as a friend and as a tool to help them continue the work that they began.
Yeah, I think even Doug Wilson, I was watching a reel recently that was really good, but he was talking, it was older, but he was talking about the men who get things done in society. In their essence, they have to be disruptors, meaning you're the disruptor of the status quo. You're the guy who challenges kind of the order of the day. And so that is going to get you hated. It's going to draw heat to your position. And as Ben said, I think it was easy for a lot of those guys to be the disruptor, but then when they see the younger generation also disrupting in their own way, it can frustrate them. One thing that Thomas brought up, and he actually he tweeted this as well, but he said there's relevant lessons from a historical trope. He said this is a major theme in the Western canon. A young hero's rise threatens an old king who sends young hero on an impossible quest, hoping that he will die, but young hero triumphs. He wins glory, he overtakes kingdom. Examples would be Zeus, Jason, and he's referencing especially Jason and the Argonauts. Here, Perseus, Bellerophon, Moses, David, Jesus, the boomers.
Hercules.
He said, old kings often won't let go of power, have no transition plan, resent, fear the youth. Old men sometimes encourage young men to do things that appeal to young male ambition, but are actually calculated to destroy the young man and keep the old men in power. Young men banding together can achieve a great deal. Jason and the Argonauts did. They defied the boomer king's expectations. The old sometimes forget what youth, optimism, comradeship, and zeal can do. So I think it's also useful to go back and look at history and say that this is a common theme, and so we can learn a lot from that. One of Thomas's questions to us was how do we not do that for ourselves for the next generation? And one of my answers was I think it's a lot of the work that we do here in Ogden with the Guild, which is our leadership training program. It means that as older men, a little older than the 20-year-olds, that we're taking them and we're looking at a 20 to 25-year-old and we're saying, I'm going to train you. I'm going to aim you. I'm going to be in your corner. I'm not going to stamp out your zeal, but as Dan said, I'm going to direct it. And then really, as we've been building out this 25-year plan for the church, we've also said, okay, I'm 40, Dan, you're 40. 25 years will be 65. At that point, you should have passed the baton. That means that you have a whole bench of other elders, deacons, and churchmen that you're now have called. They're not on the bench anymore. You've called them forward, and they're going to be the ones leading. And you do. It's not that I'm going to stop working, Lord willing, at 65, but it's going to be more of a you're not the guy in the captain's chair anymore. You maybe are giving counsel, and you're encouraging the young men in the work. You're providing the gray-haired wisdom, but I'm already coming to that realization. Like we've been given a cool thing here in Ogden. We have a leadership position, but it won't always be that way. And there will come a time when we have to pass that on. So Ben, I know you've done a lot of work with the Guild. It seems like so far it's gone really well in the last couple of years that we've been doing this. Talk about for a young guy, when somebody takes interest in you as an older man, gets in your corner and says, I want to help you win glory. Not safety first, not be careful, but I want to help you win glory. I want to help you build a productive household. I want your marriage to be great. I want you to be a pillar in this community. What does that do for a young guy?
Yeah, it's funny hearing you say that made me think of I think a good point. And I'll say it now and then kind of do the legwork, but it's not just that you want to direct the zeal of the young man. Mm-hmm. you actually want to increase the zeal of the young man.
Yeah.
You want to multiply it by directing it. So I work a lot with the guild, and it's really great. I mean, I think that we see that, Ethan Sen and I work on the guild, and we both have very different skill sets that I think complement each other well for that setting. So I do think that we've seen young men at Refuge Church be invited in, and they're already bought into the mission. They already love what the Lord is doing. But we're saying we actually want you to love it more. We want you to love it more in these key ways so that you can be the biggest help, the biggest fruit tree that you can be in the church. But I also have the benefit of having received that, I think, like from both of you guys and then from Brian especially, really like taking me kind of under the wing and over the past 6 years and especially the past 5, saying like, okay, but let's work on these things. Let's work on these things. Let's get you more directed, more focused, more mature, more honed, all this stuff.
And giving you real hacks.
Yeah, giving me real, and that was part of it, is giving me the real hacks, and then training the humility in the young man to review the hacks. Say like, you really sucked at that, or you did really, really good at that. More of this, and you can work on this for next time. And what that does to, or what it did to me, and so I'm assuming what that would do to any kind of red-blooded young man, is it lets me see that the older man is in my corner. This wiser guy is actually for me in very tangible ways. And so over the course of the past 5 years, my own zeal, especially for the pastorate, has only increased. Like, I'm more zealous now about being a minister than I was 5 years ago, or even 2 years ago. And I think that can be attributed to the faithful work of the older men who are seeking to direct the zeal, but in directing the zeal to say, so now be more zealous.
Well, it's really interesting because I remember an experience at a church when I was younger. I think I was like 23. I was going to seminary, going to a church. And I remember going to the pastor and I said, hey, my aspiration is to be a minister one day and to pastor a church and really to be involved in some sort of like Christian media. And I said, would you be interested in like discipling? And I never forget that moment. The pastor said, no, I'm not interested. We don't really do that here. And he said, if you want to start something, you should go start your own thing. And, we remained in the church, had good relationships with people there. But that is kind of the situation a lot of young men face, is that if you want anything, you have to go do it all by yourself. Now, I look back at that providentially, and I think God was also honing and shaping me through that, because it's going to take a special kind of fortitude in this generation to get stuff done.
Oh, I thought you were going to say a special kind of fortitude to disciple a young Eric Kahn.
Well, that too. And that is part of it. Like, I know, like I look back and I was like, I was a handful. I still am. But it takes a leadership quality in guys to not be afraid of that, but to say, hey, this guy could be really useful. So Andrew Isker and I were talking about this. We've both experienced in many different situations, denomination, whatever, business, work, church, whatever, where, the guys just weren't willing to like call you up into something. And so you went and you started your own. Now, again, that's been a tremendous blessing here in Ogden. But I think that was the difference, is I came here and we had talked and I kind of shared some of my vision with Dan and Brian. They took it, they honed it, they made it better. And they said, let's do the work together. That was the first time in my life that somebody had really done that. And you take a guy like that, and it can be such a rocket ship of productivity and good things. But Dan, as you think about this, we do definitely with the podcast, we get a lot of people seeking to come here. And some of them, when you first talk to them, it's a little scary because you're like, wow, like this is like a wild Mustang. Right? Like you could do a lot of good things. You have a lot of strength, but you could do a lot of damage too. So how do you, as pastorally, you've done this a lot with guys. How do you look at that and not be afraid and push it away but instead take that young guy and say, like, we can work with this.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a couple of different answers that I'm thinking through, but one I think that is probably just the most powerful is the weight of the culture and of the tribe. Because that's really what you're kind of talking about when you moved here was like you were joining a tribe. You know, we formed a tribe. We had a shared vision for the future. We had each other's backs, and we're going to build together. And the thing is, when people move here, they really have to ingrain themselves in the culture. And that's really a big protection, because with any culture, there are norms, right? And if you fall outside of those norms, people will call you out. And hopefully a lot of the norms, I think that this is the case, are righteous norms, like ordering your household well, for example, or like, you know, if a wife starts fussing about her husband to a group of other ladies, they'll stop and say, like, hey, maybe you should talk to your husband about that. You know, why are you talking to me about that? You know, and likewise, if a husband is fussing about his wife, the guys will say, like, you're gay. Stop doing that. You're actually in charge.
Maybe you should do something
about that. Yeah. So some of those things are, I think that's really the most powerful aspect of our culture. And then there's obviously like the personal discipleship and counseling from pastors and things like that. That's all. None of this is an independent work. The weight of the culture and the standards of the culture and the inculturation are really the things that are protecting a people. This is what made countries great, though. This is what made the paideia of Rome so powerful. Is like, you need to be, if you're going to be a Roman, you have to follow the paideia of Rome. You need to think like a Roman, participate in politics like a Roman. The way that you do your everyday life, your education, everything was distinctly Roman.
There's a definite paideia to Ogden.
Yes, there's a paideia to Ogden. Exactly. Like Christian education is huge. You know, homeschooling or at St. Brennan's, household order, you know, an emphasis on the Lord's Day worship, family worship, you know, things like that, singing the Psalms, you know, all of those things are very powerful and potent aspects of the culture and the enculturation of like an Ogden person, you know? So I think that's really one of the things that I'm not scared, you know, when somebody comes in. The things that I'm looking for are like, is this person a wolf? You know, is this person seeking to take away some of my people? You know, so that's something that I'm more on guard for than just like, wow, you're really excited. You know, there seems to be a lot of work there. You're rough around the edges, because you got to think too, for the average person that's moving somewhere for a church, they're not coming from like a rooted position, a stable position. There's a reason that they're moving. And it's not just because they listen to the King's Hall podcast. You know, it's probably in association with like, well, I can't find a good church near me. My family, you know, my extended family is just a mess, and my job really kind of stinks, or some ratio of those different things. So when they're coming here, they're not coming from a stable position, but they're coming hopefully into stability and rootedness here.
Well, it's interesting too. So I was talking on the Longhouse. Andrew Isker had a lot of complimentary things in his talk, I think, just that kind of complemented this idea of the Longhouse. He's talked about it in the Boniface option, which it will be republished through New Christendom Press soon. But kind of the idea is we have this huge opportunity with young right-wing men. But if you have a Longhouse, so if your paideia is into the Longhouse, and I was trying to show that this is largely what like the evangelical church, even the conservative Reformed church is like. It's a Longhouse, meaning it's feminine coded, feminine behavior norms, and particularly hysterical women. The worst kind of women are ruling, and that includes women of both sexes. Why? I'll start with Ben, but I want to get Dan's take too. Why is it so detrimental let's start with the church. If your church is a Longhouse, if the real control is maybe you have a session, maybe you have elder rule that's men, but then like the elders' wives control everything. Why is that detrimental for young men?
Yeah, I think it's because a man's work is meant to be going into disorder and bringing order, not what women do, which is going into the order that men made, that their husband or their father made, and bringing beauty, beautifying it. So when you're ruled by feminine sensibilities, whether that's explicit in the form of, a pastrix or something like that, or implicit in the form of elders on a session that are, emotionally manipulated by their wives, or their decisions have to be kind of, run by their wives to see if it's acceptable. You're going to be trying to do the work of ordering with a feminine sensibility that's actually put more towards beautification. And beautification requires order. You can't invert the process. And when you try to, you'll get a culture that's founded on, as Rigney might say, untethered empathy, where everyone that might be on the fringe is actually put into the center. And they are made the most important voices. Instead of having the ordered structure of the people in the center being the ones that are actually forming the paideia of the culture, and then the people on the fringes are being invited, constantly invited in. But the invitation comes with a charge to conform. Okay, so you're on the fringe, you want to be further in, great, we want you further in. You have to conform in these ways. I think that when you're ruled by the Longhouse, or when you're in a Longhouse paideia, that gets inverted, and instead, the people on the fringe are assumed to be right just by the mere fact that they're on the fringe. So they're assumed to have a voice or a perspective or trauma or whatever that's worth listening to. They're put in the middle, and then everyone that should be in the middle is forced to cater to their sensibilities.
Yeah, Ed Friedman talks about this. It's essentially, instead of having true leadership, like strong, well-defined leadership, what you have is the squeakiest wheels are controlling everything. We've seen this with wokeness. It's like the fussiest, most hysterical women get to control everyone else's speech, for example. You also have, I think, what is just untenable for young men is you have an environment in which the way that you punish nonconformity is by canceling or destroying the reputation of someone, right? So it's a gossip culture. It's a backbiting culture. Instead of going directly to people and saying like, hey, I have this problem. Let's work it out. Let's wrestle with our ideas. That would be very masculine. What you have instead is, well, I don't like what Dan said, so I'm going to go to 5 other people and destroy his reputation so that he's essentially ostracized from this Longhouse community.
I'll say just real quick too, like the dynamic that I just talked about, the reason that it doesn't happen in the home where the woman is like managing the home and she's given derived authority from her husband to rule over the children and to order the affairs of the household economy, as she's directed by her husband. The reason that works is because she's directed by her husband. And I think that most godly women will, I know that this would be true for my mom. I know that it's true for probably many mothers in the church, is one of the hardest things that they have to do in life is let their husband turn their sons especially into men. So the young boy that grew up, grabbing onto mom's apron while she's dancing around the kitchen doing her thing, and they form this incredible bond between mother and son. One of the hardest things for a mother to do is to watch that son that she rightfully brought into this beautiful realm of the home and nurtured and tried to make feel safe and loved and secure and all these things. She was only able to do that because her husband made the home safe and secure and ordered so much that she could beautify it. But that boy has to go out into the disorder. He has to grow up and become a man. And so the father then, or other men as mentors, have to teach him what it looks like to take order where there's chaos. And that includes pain, suffering, trial, loss, all of these hugely difficult things. And it really does become hard for a mother to watch a son go through that. So if you take that and then write it large, you could say that if the feminine sensibility to keep her son, or the feminine temptation, I'd say, to keep her son from going through that, if you write that large in a culture of a church or a broader society, you'll get a bunch of weak men that don't have chests and therefore can't take order where there's disorder. And so now when the Muslim horde does invade, the men don't know what to do. They've only been trained by the feminine sensibility to look for comfort and safety. And so they don't know that you can't beautify chaos. You have to order it first.
Yeah, it's such a great point. I remember reading this in Ann Douglas, The Feminization of American Culture, when she was talking about the 1800s, but she said, especially with the Unitarian movement, which kind of invaded everything, churches became predominantly female. She even says, as patriarchal Calvinism died out, that the feminine sensibilities took over the church. And one of the interesting things was she said that because the church was all female, the people who were chosen for pastors were largely sickly indoor boys who stayed with mom all the time because they knew how to,
Manipulate it.
speak to the feminine sensibility. Yeah, manipulation. So it's really interesting. And then you look at the church and it's like, well, most of the people in the pews today are women. It makes sense why the Gospel Coalition, Christianity today are largely feminine coded, right? It's leftist men and liberal women are kind of their audience. Dan, I want to ask you the same question. Why for a young man is it so difficult, it maybe even impossible? Like he's just not going to want to be in the Longhouse.
Yeah. I think if you just look at Sunday worship, and the patterns of a Longhouse church on in their liturgy on Lord's Day worship, often you'll get music that's quite homoerotic and feminine in nature. That's really discouraging. Whereas we actually in Western civilization have a history of war songs, like of singing into battle and like the glories of masculine singing and those great songs.
Yeah, the Psalms are psalms of largely warfare.
Yeah, exactly. And so instead of we've made those even we've essentially castrated the music that we sing to one another and to the Lord, and now it's largely feminine coded, and so it's disgusting. You get there if you're a young man, you've got red-blooded man, and now you're singing something about Jesus kissing people and all of that, and you're like, ooh. Yuck. I don't really like that. Then you get to the preaching of the word and it's very squishy, especially in the application section where it ends up landing in like, you just need more
therapeutic.
Quiet time. Yeah, exactly. It's therapeutic instead of direct application. Like, so therefore you must, repent of these specific sins, go out and build this. You need to do your duties. It's more like marching orders in a lot of way. I don't want to say like the church itself is militant, like an army, but there is a lot of army and military type language in the scriptures. And as far as like our marching orders go, to go and really subdue the nations and teach them all that Christ has commanded. Like,
well, it's interesting you say that. We there's actually a historical term, the church militant, which is kind of interesting. But I was talking with one of the ladies after church a couple weeks ago, and it was funny because they're within the last year become members, and she said something really interesting. She said, you go to all these churches that we've been to in the past, your big box evangelical churches. And it's like this, the pastors are always like soft. It's like a very therapeutic, like, Brian's talked about it, like the yearning with you. I just yearn that you would know Christ and that he would come into your heart and make his home. And there would be warmth and flowers and cookies with sprinkles. And there's like this whole vibe to it. And she said, I feel like when our pastors get up and give a confession, a charge and benediction, or preach, she said, I feel like a general is calling us to war. And she said, I just want to thank you. That's so refreshing. And so I think what's also lost is that godly women want that too. They were in their natures, they were fitted for that. Yeah. You want strong masculine leadership. It's not soft and effeminate.
Come back with your shield or on it.
Yes.
Sort of. Yeah. That's great. So I think that's really Sunday worship is just a small encapsulation of where, the Longhouse has dominated. Because I mean, we've had people in the past where you have direct application and it's harsh. It's hard to hear. And you have certain types of men that are like, that crushed me and I'm going to rise to the challenge. I'm going to repent and I'm going to walk in faith. That's what I'm going to do. But then you have the people that have been so longhoused that they're like, man, that was really hard. I'm afraid someone else might be offended at that. Did you think about that person? How it make them feel? It's like preaching the word of God. Do you think I care how it makes you feel? It doesn't make me feel great all the time. It makes me actually feel like a pile of garbage.
I actually saw this the other day. It was he got fired probably because of the Longhouse, but Nuggets basketball coach. And it was funny because he was like, our players are lazy. They're entitled. This generation of players is awful. They get paid millions of dollars. They don't want to put in the work. And one of the female reporters, and he said, I delivered that message to the players after the game. Absolutely pathetic effort. And a female reporter said, well, how do you think that made the players feel? And Mike Malone, he goes, I don't really care how it made them feel. They get paid to do a job. But I was like, that is the Longhouse mentality of like, well, and when you're a 3-year-old in your mom's kitchen, it's right and good that she has this nurturing, environment. But when you're a grown man getting paid millions of dollars, it's less a good thing. I do want to ask you guys, kind of as we wrap up here, it seems like one of the big opportunities is on the right with young men. Isker had something to say in his talk, which I thought was really interesting on this front. He was saying, like, for a lot of the like purple-haired leftists, like the message is closed off. Like they don't want to hear it. And I'm not saying that we don't evangelize everyone, but certainly you look for where will the seed take root? Like where's fertile ground? Guys on the right, they maybe have some rough edges, but largely they're like, yeah, I don't think that we should cut the genitalia off children. The rising female population of single woke females is detrimental to society. It seems like men, even Matt Walsh this week, saying like, yeah, ladies, newsflash, men don't want another man to marry. They don't want a boss babe. They want someone who's going to raise their children and keep home. So as you think about how to minister, how to reach the right, which by the way is something the evangelical church was never interested in doing. We'll start with Ben, but what sorts of things do you think are important for us to think through, and like, how do we reach them? Certainly not by longhousing them.
Yeah, not by longhousing them. And longhousing includes like the number of public facing women should be next to zero. I know I say that, and we have Bright Hearth and Lexi, but like Bright Hearth is 80% Brian talking and Lexi giving some thoughts as well, but always directed by her husband. Right. Like seriously, what women need is not just more ladies that have these massive public platforms where they engage in pugilism with men in order to make them see what it looks like to be a woman. This is what Megyn Kelly is totally missing in that stupid tweet where she was talking about like, oh, we have a huge dearth of conservative women, but like, do they not have great role models? I mean, look at all these conservative boss babes. A godly woman doesn't want that. Like a good woman doesn't want to look at a boss babe and think that she must have really good advice because look at all that she's accomplished in the outside world. No, a godly woman wants to look at a Titus 2 type woman, who I believe Lexi is, and say, look at how she's ordered her home. Look at how she respects her husband. Look at how she loves and nurtures her children and sets everything up so that this place of rest in the home can actually be that, a place of rest for all of her people. That's what more women want, but they're only going to get that in good churches. You're not going to get that on a podcast, at least not enough to actually mentor you one-on-one. You're certainly not going to get that from like Fox News or any, talking head lady on Gab or anything like that. You're only going to get that in churches. But I'll say one other thing too. I think that it's possible to create a Longhouse paideia even without having a lot of women in explicit or implicit leadership. And the way that I think that can happen is when you get, again, usually the older class of man who is too lazy or too tired, one of the two, to look at a young man who's a woe guy, who's like, hey, we need to direct this zeal. You're very zealous. We need to do the work of directing it. And the old tired man will say like, yeah, I'm not interested in doing that. Instead, I'd rather have the yes man, the giddy up guy, who's quiet, lazy, not really zealous about anything, pretty apathetic, and who you have to just, push tooth and nail to get anything done worth doing. That's really attractive to the older generation of man who doesn't want to do any of the pushing or directing. And that will create the Longhouse. It will. So when you hear older men say, hey, we're really looking for zealous guys, we're really looking for woe guys, not giddy up guys, they are most of the time lying because they've never actually had to do that. And I think, like, from my experience, again, seeing the older men at Refuge, that's been the exception, not the rule. Like the guys here are more than happy to look at young up and coming guys like your own son, Benjamin. And he's a zealous guy. He's a woe guy at times, but everyone is stoked about that. And we're stoked to put the work in to say, yeah, dude, this is awesome. Like, actually become more zealous, but become more zealous in this direction. And then when you've won the heart, then the work kind of starts to gain momentum, and it doesn't do itself, but it does complement itself. So I think a warning maybe to listeners, if you're in a church or a job, whatever, where functionally what the men who you look up to want is a yes man or a giddy up guy, just an apathetic guy, it doesn't matter what they say. It doesn't matter. If that's what they want functionally, then you're in a place on borrowed time. It will be a Longhouse. Maybe not in your generation, but someday it will be. If that marks the leadership, an unwillingness to actually put the work in to shepherding the zealous young man, then it will become a Longhouse eventually, unless something radical changes.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the, I forget the law, it'll come to me, but any institution that is not, explicitly right-wing will become left-wing, right? So you could apply that to this as well. Dan, as you think about that question, any thoughts kind of where would you?
Yeah, I think the fields are white for the harvest on the right. And the reason, somebody brought this up at the conference, so the real challenge, why is the pink-haired feminists, like, why are they so, it's not just that they're indifferent towards the gospel and towards Christianity. They hate it. Like, they hate it. Well, what is going on there? Well, I think there's a sense in which God has given them over, a lot of the leftists, but they also deny nature. It's not just that they deny the gospel. They actually despise natural law. Whereas the people on the right, they recognize natural order. When you said it, like, you shouldn't cut the genitalia off of children, like, that's obvious to them. They understand nature.
Or that, a man can't, like, give birth to a child and nurse it.
Yeah, they're not out of their minds. Where people on the left, they have tried to distort even nature that clearly displays the glory of God and the knowledge of God. And they're in order to really successfully disciple the left, you have to convert them to reality before you can convert them to the supernatural.
There's actually
to the
like
glory of Christ.
Exorcisms that need to be done on the
absolutely.
It really is a demoniac death cult. They hate everything, not only about God, but everything that God made.
Yeah, and so people on the right, they understand, that there is real morality, universal morality. They understand that there are laws of nature, things that ought not to be done and things that one should do in order to love their neighbor. They have similar categories to where it is fertile soil, but people have historically hated, Christians have hated people on the right. They've hated them on the right because they're a lot of the guys on the right, they are zealous. They're rough around the edges. They have this sense in where they're like, I don't really care what anybody thinks about me. It's kind of like a cultural thing, whereas the left is so concerned with perception, so Longhoused. It's always indirect and, subversive and manipulative. Whereas your standard, like, blue collar guy on the right, he just notices reality. A lot of those guys are pretty good guys, just generally speaking, and they need to repent and believe in the gospel and to have new birth and everything like that. But just generally, humanly speaking, I mean, they're like pretty average, like good people. And
I feel like they're
yeah.
also willing to hear the hard truths.
Yeah.
Because I think, as we were talking about earlier, there's this misplaced move that people I think right now are making where it's like, we kind of won with right principles. And so now we're going to shrink back and we're going to start softening the message so that we get positions of favor and power. Mm-hmm. But actually, I think where you win and where we've won in Ogden is saying to that guy in the right wing, yes, you're right. And like Nancy Mace is right for not wanting men to go in women's bathrooms. But then we take it a step further and we say, but let's apply that principle to Nancy's early life when she forced her way into the Citadel, which was a male-only space. She is committing the same error that she claims to be against. When she goes to the prayer breakfast and jokes about how she was fornicating right before she got there. Like, I think one thing we have to do as Christians is not soften the message to win that guy or gal, but we have to go harder.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. When they're noticing something about the left and how insane they are, they're like, oh yeah, that's because it's a demon death cult and they're worshiping demons by their actions. And the way to combat it though isn't to fuss, and just complain and listen to Fox News. It's actually to repent in the Lord Jesus Christ and to wage war against the demon death cult. That's what you do. Just repent and believe in the Lord Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and I even pointed this out in the talk, but Riley Gaines was doing a lot of good work on transgenderism, opposing it. But then she poses for like the American conservative dad's like swimsuit issue. Yeah. And I'm like, no, like that is something that you have to call out. And again, you just have to be comfortable with like, people are going to hate you. That's part of being a faithful prophet, lowercase p prophet in this age. It also points me in, and we can close with this, but it's a big reason I think for our conference this year. And it's looking back to the founding of our country, which was Christian and Protestant, and saying part of how we got here, Ben, is that we lost the will even to exist. Mm-hmm. So I've said this on X, but if we had the will to exist, what would it look like? Well, number one, we would close our borders. We would start making babies and we would start putting our people first, right? That's just, ordo amoris. Like this is just natural order of things that we ought to love and protect that which is ours. People don't really have that today. It's more ascendant on the right. But Ben, as you think about the conference, why did we choose that? Why is that important in this moment?
Yeah, I think that we have an inheritance in history from our forefathers of the West. Men like Charlemagne, men like Alfred, men like George Washington, men like Constantine the 11th. Like these are men who helped make the West, and yes, Aristotle and Plato. Like these are all men that helped make the West what it was. And so when we want to recover Christendom, it's important to remember, yes, that means preaching the gospel, repentance and faith, making disciples, but it's not enough that we just reclaim the fact that we're Christians. We have to go a step further and remember that we are Western Christians. That's a different kind of Christianity than Eastern Christian. It's a different ethos. Same faith, one baptism, but very different ethotic flavors to those things. And so part of why I'm so excited about our conference is because it's an opportunity to start that conversation. What does it look like to practically reclaim the Western ethos and become a Western Christian man and woman? Well, one of the things is safety third. That helped define the West. Risk is unavoidable. You will be taking a risk. Doing nothing is one of the biggest risks you can take because it has virtually no opportunity for reward and every opportunity for failure. And so safety third, I think, is going to be a really important principle for people to live by. Just also to quickly comment, this is something I wanted to say on the panel, but ran out of time, about the fields being white for harvest on the right. Part of the duty of knowing the times, like one of the things that we emphasize in the guild and among our team is we want to be men that know the times. That means recognizing what type of preparatory work the Spirit has been doing when you preach the gospel, even if people don't convert, you'd like to hope in faith that the Spirit is nonetheless preparing souls for eventual conversion, softening hearts, all these things. And I do think that that's been happening a lot. This is one of the biggest problems that I saw with the Antioch Declaration, is they said something in there, some ridiculous thing about like how being angry at a lie that you've been told does not give you the right posture to accept truth, or some nonsense like that. What that totally ignores is that that may be right in and of itself. Like you're not ready to positively give your life to the true, good, and beautiful just by nature of being angry about a lie that you've been told. But being angry at the lie does prepare you to accept the truth. It does prepare you to have a positive vision for the future if you are given it. And so I don't think that I think that we need to be careful not to ignore that. And the right is angry. This kind of new ascendant right, this new Christian right, is very angry at the lies that it's been told. That means that the Spirit, I believe, has prepared the hearts of the people that are angry at those lies to then hear and be given the good, true, and beautiful. So I'm excited about that.
It is interesting, just interjecting, that at the conference, I talked to a lot of guys who I'm like, how did you find out about Joel, us, this movement? And they were like, actually, my whole background is like right-wing politics. And I had skipped out on church for many years because all I had ever heard was like the Longhouse, accept Jesus into your heart and everything will be therapeutically great for you. And then we're actually providing answers to their questions that are grounded, as Dan said, also in natural law. And so these people were like, yeah, I mean, to your point, like I saw the law or the lie. I saw the problems, and in many ways, yes, those guys were ready to receive the full truth because of that.
Yeah, it's a preparatory work, and that's very, very important. But yeah, the conference, safety third, we got to reclaim the Western ethos. We have to be Western Christians, not just Christians.
Yeah, I love that. Dan, final thoughts on conference? Why you're so excited for people to come?
The best conference in history. In
history. And might I just add, as you're thinking about your answer, I mean, you probably already know because you're so big-brained, but we have currently 40 men. We have capped the singles mixer. There are 40 men who are coming, and I think we have like 20 women. So ladies, what is it, like a $1 ticket? Because you can't make it zero.
Can't make it zero. But ladies, if you're single,
all the single ladies, Dan's already thinking of the song. Come on out for the conference. We're going to be, I think, doing some videos on this, but like last year, there was one couple that's in our church that met at the singles mixer. They got married and they have a baby on the way. So for the inner nihilist, the black-pilled nihilist who says there's no good women, there's no good men out there, I just want to encourage you. We've had, I think, 3 or 4 weddings now that have resulted from the singles mixers. So just want to encourage people to check that out. Go to newchristianoppressed.com/2025. You can sign up for the singles mixer and, get yourself hitched. Could be a great time. Dan, most exciting thing for you about the conference?
The most exciting thing?
Other than my talk, but.
Yeah. So the most exciting thing, I don't know. I'll give you a couple. So the talks always like inflame zeal. Like the reason that we pick the speakers we do and the topics that we give to them is because we think they're the best person to speak to a specific idea or a specific topic. We're not necessarily going out and getting the biggest names to draw the most people, to get the biggest conference. That's actually not our goal. What we want to do is find the right person to speak to the right thing. And I think that, the last 2 years that we've done the conference, it's obvious to anybody that's attended that it's been very high quality. It's been very encouraging. I think the other thing that is often underestimated at conferences is just the connections with networking and the friendships that can be made. Everything from, like you were talking about with the singles mixer and their marriages. Now there are 2 families that are connected, and there's a new family that's being made right now. all the way to like we've had multi-million-dollar business deals that were forged because of networking at the conference, and just the opportunities when you get a group of builders in the same building and you get them to talk about what they could actually make, what they could create. I mean, there is endless possibilities.
Well, it is interesting. I was thinking about this is kind of like why Rhodesia was so great in its heyday. Is because you took all the most entrepreneurial, go-getter, risk-taking guys from England, and you're like, let's put them all in one place. Mm-hmm. And they built an amazing country. So yeah, same deal. Like we'll have, I mean, even the connections that were made at some of our conferences led to the building in Tennessee with Ridge Runner. I mean, it's quite impressive. So yeah, calling guys out. We've got a business mixer. We've got a VIP mixer. We got a pastor's breakfast. Definitely want to encourage guys to check that out. Great time to connect, especially if you're interested in building.
We got the New Christendom Games too.
Oh yeah.
There's going to be games. So
that might be the thing people have asked about the most.
Yeah. I mean, I get it. Like, you know, it's like when Aeneas' father died, what did they do? Well, they had physical trials to see who was the strongest and who could wrestle the hard and who could run the fastest. Like, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's part of the West, playing games, physical tests. So if you're interested in that, you can find that somewhere, but I can't remember the link.
Yeah, we'll have to include that in the show notes. Pit yourself against Dan's physical prowess is
good
I think
luck.
what we're saying. So good luck. We want to thank you guys for joining us on this episode of the King's Hall podcast. Until next time, Deus Vault.
Stay safe. Mask up. Get the vax. Don't take unnecessary risks. Be careful. We've been coddled, smothered in warnings, trained to fear and avoid risk. We've been taught to play it safe and be on our guard. And not just against a scraped knee or a failed endeavor. No, we've been taught to censor our speech, our words, even our thoughts. Don't think those dangerous thoughts. Don't notice. Don't speak out. If you do, we're coming for you. Who's coming for you? It almost doesn't even matter. Whether it's the HR lady at your company of either sex, weaponized church courts, the social media censors, or even those you once considered allies. Watch out. Take care. Play it safe. But was it always this way? Have we always lived under this kind of stifling, wet blanketing panopticon? Is this the spirit of our Christian forefathers? Of the men who founded our nation in blood and in faith, willing to face down all the might of Britannia and her redcoats? There was a time when Americans didn't shrink from risk, when they would rather die than bend. Our Christian forefathers knew what it was to draw the sword and throw away the scabbard. They knew what it was to set sail for the unknown. They defied tyrants. They built, explored, and dared great things. Who settled this land? Who built one of the greatest nations ever to be? Who settled the West and covered the continent from sea to sea with a Christian people? Who searched out glories, crisscrossed the plains with railroads, and fought off usurpers and invaders on all sides? Risk wasn't a bug, it was a feature. Without it, our fathers knew, there was no greatness. And now, we're supposed to trade boldness for bureaucracy? We're supposed to tremble at the unknown instead of mastering it? We're supposed to bow and scrape, not even before bullets, but before HR ladies? We don't think so. It's time to remember who we are. This year, join us here at New Christendom Press for our annual conference, Safety Third, Recovering the American Will to Greatness. 4 days to forge new friendships, build coalition, and work to recover what was lost. It's time to reclaim the spirit that built this nation, to break free from fear, to risk, to build, to lead. The future belongs to the bold.